This video has some tips and critical thinking for Chapter 2. So I'm in Module 1 of Healthy Lifestyles in the Learn chapter for Chapter 2, and I'm going to go to the e-textbook. And in Section 2.1, I just want to say that I think this What's on My Plate tutorial is well worth the time going through it. It'll help you with things like pizza and soup that don't really look like the meal that's shown in the My Plate icon. So I encourage you to look through that. And I just wanted to point out in this part of the textbook that you are doing some of the things here. You're doing a food diary and you're analyzing your intake using iProfile. And I hope you found out some body measures such as your height and your weight, maybe even your waist circumference, and that you are considering your medical history and your family's medical history. And then it's also good if you can to have some lab tests done and know some of the numbers like your blood pressure and your blood lipid profile. And I did just want to point out here about your total cholesterol number. Your total cholesterol should be less than 200 milligrams per deciliter. So that's your blood cholesterol. Your dietary cholesterol intake should be less than 300 milligrams per day. So don't get the 200 milligrams per deciliter of blood cholesterol mixed up with the recommendation for 300 milligrams per day maximum for your cholesterol intake. Now the next section can get pretty confusing because there are so many acronyms like DRIs and EERs and AMDRs. And the one that gets very confusing to people is this normal curve. So I did want to go over this briefly. So this is showing on this axis of the graph numbers of people, and this is the daily nutrient requirement. It could be any nutrient requirement. So most people, when you're looking at a normal curve, fall around the middle or the average. So a lot of people have a daily nutrient requirement that's in the middle, and that would be your estimated average requirement, your EAR. And then scientists determine the recommended dietary allowance typically by going 2 standard deviations above the mean or above the average. So this is the mean. They go 2 standard deviations above that, and this way it ends up that 95% of the people will be covered by the recommended dietary allowance. So for example, the recommended dietary allowance for vitamin C is 75 milligrams per day, and that means that if you end up on your iProfile meeting your RDA and you're one of these people that are in this part of the curve, your RDA is going to definitely be met. A few people fall on this side of the RDA in the normal curve, and that means that their RDA is not going to be met for that particular day. But typically we eat a diet over several days, and usually you're going to be getting more than the RDA some days and less, and then it averages out, and it's not something you have to worry about. One other thing about this graph I wanted to point out is that this upper limit probably is not here. It's probably somewhere way off the page. So for example, the RDA for vitamin C, as I said again, for an adult is 75 milligrams per day. The upper limit for vitamin C is 2,000 milligrams per day. So this actually would probably be way off this page if they were going to put it on this graph. The other thing in this section that I wanted to point out is the estimated energy requirements. And I'm going to pull up Appendix A to help with that. So here's Appendix A, and the estimated energy requirement is determined using these formulas. So I'm going to focus on this one here for males and females that are over the age of 19. So what you do is you start off with these numbers, you subtract a factor that's based on your age in years, and then you're going to add your physical activity, and that's based also on your height, your weight, and your height. And you need to figure out what your physical activity coefficient is to add this number. And the physical activity coefficient is found in this table. So if you're sedentary, your physical activity coefficient is going to be 1. And if you're very active, somebody who's a construction worker or maybe an athlete in training, you'll end up with a very active physical activity coefficient of over 1.4. So you can plug that into the equation. So you can do this for yourself individually if you'd like to. Typically, males are going to have an estimated energy requirement of around 3,000 calories per day if their average height and weight and the age of about 19, and for females that would be about 2,400 calories. The other thing in this section that I wanted to tell you is this serving size sleight of hand is very, very helpful. It tells you that on the food label it's really important to check the serving size and the number of servings in a package. And then the other thing is the acceptable macronutrient distribution ranges, and those are in Appendix A as well. So here's the acceptable macronutrient distribution ranges, and again I'm going to focus on adults here. And you can see we have a fairly wide range of what we should have for carbohydrates as percentage of our calories. We should have less than a quarter of our calories from added sugars, and some people say this may even need to be lower. And then total fat is here. We have ranges for our essential fatty acids and then ranges for protein. So there are the AMDRs. Put this away. So in this section, Tools for Diet Planning, I'm going to scroll quickly down here. I think that this particular section, the Nutrition Insight, is very helpful, but I did want to let you know that what they have in the textbook is for somebody who's eating a 2,000 calorie per day diet. And if you want to see what this means for you, if you're eating fewer than 2,000 calories or more, you can go to Appendix D or choosemyplate.gov. And choosemyplate.gov will have something that's very colorful like this and much easier to look at than what's in Appendix D. And then finally, I think this this illustration that explains how one meal of my plate fits into a whole day of eating is extremely helpful. So I highly encourage you to go through that and listen to that section of the textbook. And I think the part about food labels is fairly self-explanatory. Food labels are very complicated, but I think if you go through this, you will understand how to compare one food to another by using the nutrition facts label. And again, as that little video explains, pay particular attention to the serving size that's in your food and also how many servings are in each package. And the last thing I wanted to do was go over this critical and creative thinking question number 2. So it's asking about a college student, and it's her iProfile analysis showed that she's getting less than the RDA for vitamin C and more than the RDA for thiamine. And the questions are, does she have a vitamin C deficiency because of this analysis, or is she at risk for thiamine toxicity? So I'm going to go back to that normal curve. It's here also in your summary. And as I explained before, the RDA for vitamin C is 75 milligrams per day. So let's say her iProfile shows that she's getting less than this. Let's say she's getting, maybe 50 or 60 milligrams of vitamin C per day. Does that mean that she's going to end up with a deficiency? And basically the answer to that is most likely not. The odds are her requirements are even lower than the RDA, so she may be getting even what she needs. And if she was getting, if her requirement is greater than the RDA, say she needs, 80 milligrams per day and she's only getting 75 on that 3-day food record, she's probably not going to get a deficiency because, over the course of several weeks, she's probably going to end up getting more than the RDA some days and less on others due to seasonal variations and changes in her diet. So it's probably not going to be something that she needs to worry about. Now let's talk about thiamine. The RDA for thiamine for her would be 1.1 milligrams per day. And let's say she's getting even twice that amount. Is she going to get a toxicity? Let's go back to Appendix A to look at this a little bit more. So in Appendix A, if you scroll down, you're going to see the chart with the tolerable upper intake levels, or ULs. And if we look for thiamine, which is in this column, we'll see that no upper limit has been determined. And this is because it's extremely hard to get a thiamine toxicity, because basically what happens is if you take in too much, it's a water-soluble vitamin and you're going to lose any extra in your urine. But you see there are a couple of B vitamins that do have upper limits, and if you find that you're going above the upper limits on these, you'd want to be very careful and look into this more and maybe change your supplement intake, because this is most likely not going to be happening due to something that you're doing by eating regular foods. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say about Chapter 2. I hope that you learned a lot about diet planning and some of the dietary guidelines that are important for keeping you healthy for many years to come.